Episode 6. Hey, what's going on? It's Dan, your host for the Brewed for Life podcast. Just wanted to start this one with a little bit of excitement as this is episode 6. I'm really enjoying doing this podcast and talking about whatever it is that comes to mind. So this episode, we're going to touch on something that has become a pretty big part of my life. That is making beer. As the name says, Brewed for Life, I do enjoy beer, and I have enjoyed beer a good portion of my life. It was a natural progression for me to want to get involved in some kind of a home brewing process. And I did that, somewhere around 2015 is when I got involved with making my first, beer at home. And that was with a small little homebrew kit, not Mr. Beer. I believe it was called Brooklyn Brewery or something to that effect. And the kit came with a little 1 gallon glass jug, and it had some specialty grains, and then it came with a bunch of extracts and hops and obviously directions on how to go through the entire process. I really enjoyed that. It took, I don't know, probably 3 hours to do. When that was finally finished, it kind of it sparked my interest. And that was like, I think it was a brown ale, my first beer that I had ever made. It kicked off what has now turned into probably about $12,000 or $13,000 worth of equipment to still do what it is that I really enjoy doing. So starting back in that 2015 time, I was spending, I don't want to say a lot of money, but a good amount of money buying beer, and at that time beer was it wasn't really kind of coming into its own, but like some pretty big names were out there as far as IPAs, and that at the time was Gandhibat, which is brewed by New England Brewing here in Connecticut, and the other was Heady Topper, which is brewed up in Vermont from a brewer called Alchemist. And from there, you had your Pliny beers from Russian River out in California, and of course you had Sierra Nevada out that way as well. But IPAs is really what kind of grabbed my interest in what the world has known as craft brewers, and they're just small brewers that take some more risks other than the big boys, the Millers, the Coors, the Anheuser-Busch's of the world. Dogfish Head was all part of that revolution as well. So I did a lot of time chasing beers and finding stuff that was hard to find. At that time, Sip of Sunshines and those things were pretty prevalent. It made me want, like, people who really love food, like they want to be able to be a good cook. Beer made me want to try to make beer. And I got really involved in it. Got to meet some really great people. It has literally brought me to where I am today. So the transition of how I got from one little 1 gallon jug homebrew kit to what I have now is essentially a semi-automated 25 gallon pot system and 2 stainless steel fermenters, glycol chiller, kegerator, canning machine. I think that's everything. That progress obviously didn't happen overnight. So went from this like 1 gallon kit and really enjoying that to deciding that, all right, now I'm going to take a step. And what I did is I bought a 5 gallon startup kit from Northern Brewer, which was just essentially an 8 gallon stock pot and a 15 gallon cooler, which was set up with like a false bottom to make sure the grain didn't go through, and that turned into a couple of pots and an immersion chiller and And, pieces just kind of started to fall into place and bottles. And then I was bottling. And the process for a home brewer to make beer in the startup is it's a small amount of money, because if you enjoy drinking beer, chances are you already have bottles that are not twist-offs that you could just wash and reuse. Or you do what I did when I got tired of bottling, which was I walked into BJ's one day and they had a kegerator that they had been selling for I think like $200 or $300 or something, and I ended up picking it up after Christmas for like $130, and I started kegging beer and doing it that way, which saved me a ton of time, a lot of aggravation, and really kind of progressed into building my own bar and doing all these other things at home. But brewing beer without getting too far into it it's about water, it's about grain, and it's about hops. Each one of them, just like cooking, there's different processes and different ways to brew beer and different ways to ferment beer based on what style it is that you are looking to make. The best and simplest way that I can describe how to brew beer is essentially making tea, and then the hops are the way that you explore flavor. So you take the grains, you seep them in water, you let them sit there for at least in 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer, depending on what style it is that you're making. And then you sprinkle in different quantities of hops or different kind of hops. Different kind of hops change your flavor, like the difference of black pepper and white pepper and cumin, oregano. Like, if you think about hops as those different kinds of spices, then you'll understand how that they incorporate flavor. From that, through time and temperature and boiling, then you work over into your yeasts with. In the beginning, you don't really understand too much about the importance of yeasts and the kind of flavor profiles that come from the fermentation process. So you usually start with something simple like an SO4 or an SO5, and it's a pretty generic ale yeast that you could use for a bunch of different things in the beginning. But like I said, as you progress, you start to change the kind of yeast that you're using based on whatever style. You put that into a jug with an airlock, because air is not your friend. It has airborne yeast strains and other things that can contaminate your beer. And the fermentation process, which is just the yeast eating the sugars in what's called your wort, which is after all those grains have seeped and you boiled it down, which is just concentrating it, get that chilled down to about 68 degrees. That goes into your fermenter, and the yeast then does its thing where it feeds on all the sugars, and there's two byproducts of the yeast feeding on the sugar, which is alcohol and carbon dioxide. So you want the alcohol, which obviously isn't going to evaporate, but you need the airlock to protect the outside air from the inside air of your fermentation container, and it allows the carbon dioxide to escape. Then after that process, you essentially have beer, but it's uncarbonated beer. For those that bottle, they add another sugar and water solution to their now fermented beer, and what that does is it adds sugars back into it. So any of the yeast that's still suspended within that fermented beer will now feed on those sugars, but now that beer is going to be in a glass bottle or a keg or whatever it is that you're going to use to hold your beer. That will, over the span of 2 weeks, the carbon dioxide left from that fermentation process is now in a sealed container, so the liquid absorbs all of the carbon dioxide, and now you have a carbonated beer. So the process is, it's kind of very scientific, and it definitely gets more into depth, which I'm not going to bore the podcast with all the ins and outs of water chemistry and different profiles of hops and profiles of yeast strains and the differences between base malts and specialty malts and all that kind of stuff because, well, to be honest, most people don't really care. The process is cool and they love the end result, which is, really what started me in really enjoying beer. But I will say that, like, through this process of brewing beer, which for me, from start to finish, is about a 4-hour day, which is, cleaning and sanitizing equipment, getting the brew day done, work on getting things cleaned up, getting things transferred into my fermenters, making sure temperatures are right, taking all my readings of pH levels and gravity, which gravity just talks about the density of wort or beer, and making sure that everything's operating properly. For me, from that point, it's usually about 5 days. Sometimes, depending on the style, it could be 7 days for fermentation to take place. And depending on the style, it could be, about 2 weeks from start to finish from when I could drink it, because I don't go through the traditional sugar and water to carbonate my beer. I force carbonate it. So the temperature with my glycol chillers and stuff, like I can drop the temperature and get things carbonated within my fermenters and then just transfer a beer that's ready to drink already at temperature and whatever. It's pretty similar to a small scale brewery. So that's a little bit about, a very abbreviated talk about the brewing process and kind of some of the equipment and stuff that I have that helps my process. Through these years of being a home brewer, I have been very lucky to, come in contact and meet different people that helped shape what it is that I know and really bring me to a point where I really enjoy brewing beer and I love the challenge of creating good beer and just like cooking, pushing the envelope of flavors and what works and what doesn't work and adding this and adding that to try to make it better or make it slightly different from what is readily available out in the world. One of those people that really brought me into wanting to challenge what it is that I do is I met this gentleman. He was also a home brewer. I met him at a beer fest, and he developed this beer that was like drinking the milk from your Fruit Loops or Fruity Pebbles. It was just very berry and it had a little bit of lactose in it, so it had that like milky mouthfeel, but like it was spot on for that. And it was the first time in my life I had ever had anything like that. The first time I even seen a beer where somebody challenged the boundaries of what was traditionally known as a beer, which, for the rest of us would just be like your IPAs, and everybody thinks a stout is Guinness, and, your regular like lagers or light-bodied ales, or like your Budweiser, your Millers, your Coors Light, and Corona, any of those kind of, major brands. So I tried this beer at this beer fest, and I did some looking, and I started following him on social media, and then I started talking to him on social media, and I canned some of my stuff, and I brought it down, and every time I saw him at a beer fest, I was making sure that people went over and tried his beer because I was just that captivated by how fantastic this beer was. And he and I became really, really good friends, and we brewed beers together, we talked about beers together, and through time, I got to meet some other really, really great brewers from him. And they have helped me develop my skills and my knowledge on how to make a good beer. I couldn't be thankful enough for those interactions with him and the knowledge that he gave me and the people that he's allowed me to be introduced to and the resources that those individuals have been. It's mind-blowing to me, to be starting making beer almost 10 years ago and to have had the privilege to meet some of the people that I have met in those 10 years who, no matter how good my beer gets, and no matter how many times I give it to friends and other brewers and whatever, and the feedback that they give me about what it is that I make, one, I appreciate all the feedback, and there have been times where I was told that my beer was really good, even though I will always be my toughest critic, and I will, even beers that like people were like, wow, that's incredible, I just think it's okay. And I don't know if that's my, inability to be able to take praise, or really inability to look at what I did and appreciate the time and the effort and the craft that was put into it to make it. Or is it that somebody's saying something nice about what it is that I made? I can genuinely say 3 of the people that I've met that have had my beer were genuine. They said what they meant. They critiqued it where opportunities lie to make it better. And then there are others that have tried some of my beer and they just appreciate the craft so much that they share their opinion but won't say anything bad about it, because not everybody makes beer the same. Not everybody's tastes are the same. Not everybody's style of making beer is the same. And I appreciate them, because the one person that I have in mind who really kind of stays right in the middle, doesn't give you too much negative stuff and too much positive stuff, is one of the most creative brewers that I have had the privilege of not just having their beer, but having multiple conversations with them in Connecticut. I'm so incredibly proud to say that I know them, and so incredibly proud to be able to have somebody who I think makes phenomenal beer on a not a homebrew level, even though if you talk to the guy, he's going to tell you, he's like, I'm just like you guys on a bigger scale, but he's not. He's very, very talented, very, very humble, and it just blows me away that I have an opportunity to be able to spend time around some of those people. I'm obviously not going to name who any of these people are, because I don't want to put anybody on the spot like that, and I haven't asked their permission, friends, professionals or whatever, to share any of their information on the podcast. So I wouldn't do that without discussing with them first. But my passion for making beer brought me to a place, not this year, but last year I entered a couple of homebrew competitions, which I had never done before. I had always just kind of kept everything to friends and family and shared it with, within those circles. And the reason why I upgraded to a much bigger system and all the money that I had is because I wanted to start competing within the homebrew contests in my area. And I did, competed in one up in Hartford, and not really knowing that much about what I was getting into, just that I was going to enter this beer competition, and hopefully I did really well. But the beer that I submitted to that was a blonde ale, and I added some different specialty grains which were not traditionally within that style, and this competition was based solely on style, similar to like AKC for dogs. There's beer judging for the same kind of guidelines and stuff, but for beer. And so I entered to that, and I didn't place, and I was a little frustrated and disappointed, because I was really, really happy with how that beer came out, and I did get good feedback and decent scores on the beer, but not good enough to place. So that was in late winter, early spring when I entered that. So I followed that up with another homebrew competition later on in the year, and I entered my American Pale Ale, and I entered a cream ale into that competition. And again, I went in and I didn't really have any huge expectations, because some of the people that I hold at a high regard for being some really, really talented homebrewers also had entered in this. And as I showed up for the awards part of this competition, they had mentioned that there was beers from a multitude of states throughout the country, which also surprised me because I was just thinking this was like a local event. Maybe it would pull from Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island, maybe Massachusetts. I didn't think it was going to be so widespread. The first category that they're reading off is light ales, and first name they called was me for my cream ale, and like I kind of like sat in my chair and paused for a minute because like I wasn't expecting to win anything, and to have my beer place in a competition like this one. This one was held at New England Brewing down in Woodbridge or New Haven. And so the beer gets called, and I go up, and I grab my medal, and I sit back down, and my fiance's giving me a hug, and she's super excited, and the guys that I was there with, who I think are fantastic home brewers, and they were congratulating me, and we get through the light ales and stuff, and then we get to the pale ale category, and my beer in that category wins best overall, and I don't know, I was really, really taken back by that because one of the guys I was with makes a phenomenal pale ale. I think it overshadows mine. I think mine is good, but it's not as good as my buddy's. And he, thank God, did not enter his pale ale that year, but we get through all the other categories. And, my buddy did really well, and we were all sitting outside of New England Brewing and obviously drinking some of their beers and any of the unopened samples that we had dropped off for the Brew Fest. We're all sitting outside and we're all, sampling the beers that we had submitted. And my buddy drinks the pale ale, and he says to me that it was incredible and he thought it was better than his. And that if I had submitted that beer the year before when he won the pale ales with his, that he thought that mine would have finished ahead of his. And that's an incredible honor for me. And really that's why I wanted to enter competitions, was to be able to see how my beer compares next to some of the other home brewers within our state, because Connecticut does have some really, really great brewers. And I don't know why they don't get put into, the conversations with some of the best in the world, and it's kind of disappointing. We have in this state some really great brew minds. Matt at Counterweight is probably one of the best minds in the state, in my opinion. Transcend makes some freaking phenomenal beers, from sours to pilsners and IPAs and stouts. Like, he just very, very well balanced and super smart. He does a friggin' phenomenal job. Kinsman makes some great beers. Those probably gotta be my some of my favorites within the state. Fox Farm out in the eastern part of the state makes some phenomenal beer. There's some other ones within the state that I think make good beer. I don't think, there's anything that they do that is bad. I just think that those ones really kind of make some beer that is head and shoulders over the rest. Now, take that for what it's worth. I haven't had beer from every brewery in the state, so there might be some other ones out there. This is just based on my experience. Little House in Cheshire makes some great beer. I know I'm missing a bunch. Do yourself a favor. If you are somebody who doesn't like beer or really wants to get interested in beer, when you go to wherever your local brewery is, sit down, get a flight, try something from each style that they have. I guarantee that there is a beer out there for everybody, as long as you're willing to open up your mind and taste it for what it is. Treat it like wine almost, where you sip it, swish it around, really get all the flavors, see how the mouthfeel is, see what hops and stuff you get out of it, and enjoy it. Don't just treat it like it's your Bud Lights or your Miller Lights or any of those things where you're just shotgunning it down because the flavor isn't great and you just want to get it over with. Give yourself an opportunity to taste some different things. Try some stouts. Stouts are phenomenal. Drink them at room temperature. There are so many stouts that are out there that have fantastic hazelnut and caramel and chocolate and coffee flavors that it's not what you would think when you drink a Guinness. It is unbelievable. Give yourself an opportunity to do these things. Try different things. Don't be afraid. You're not going to like them all, but give yourself an opportunity to enjoy different things. Take the risk. It's worth it. Talk to you guys soon.